Rings. It's raining outside the window. It brings a dreary feeling. The little drops pound the eaves and the roof too often to think that it won't get wet. Glancing out the window, I can still see the dim light trying to break through the gray, dense clouds. But its attempts are futile. It seems that not even a bird could get through the low, gloomy sky if it ventured to fly in such nasty weather. This gray milk pall stretches over our town for a long time, which means the rain won't stop. Will she get wet? Sitting at home, in a comfortable armchair with a glass in her hand, it is easy to speculate about how she feels. Maybe she's already completely soaked in cold, and has become like a homeless poor puppy just waiting to be sheltered. The funny curls are wet and stick unpleasantly to her pretty face, like they do to her when she takes a bath or bathes in the lake. I always pulled them away from her face to look into her adorable eyes. Admittedly, at such moments her hair is not as beautiful as usual, and looks like river sludge. But I never tell her that. I want to put on some fun song, but none comes to mind. Sad and incomprehensible. Either this weather is to blame for everything or her. I saw her standing outside, right under the lush lilacs we planted together years ago. We laughed like crazy as our little tree unfurled its first leaves. She danced funny around it, like around a Christmas tree, and I shouted out a tune, trying to match her movements. I was very hoarse that night, and she was so tired that I had to carry her into the house in my arms. But we didn't regret it one bit, we had fun. I never would have thought that an ordinary tree could give so much happiness. It was silly and ridiculous. But next to it, everything was different, special. And the ordinary tree that we carefully planted in the ground made our relationship even stronger. The taller and more lush the lilacs became, the stronger our love was. It was a strange, delusional regularity, but that's how it was, though you don't have to believe me. The lilacs brought us closer together the way a son or daughter should have. But alas, we could not have children. I think we would have been pretty good parents, but someone upstairs didn't want to check it out. When I saw her under our tree, I didn't rush outside to wrap her in a warm plaid and walk her home. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a whiskey. I could feel a cold, sharp rod driving into my chest. It was so cold that it made me shrink and tremble. As I poured the whiskey, my hands shook so that they could bang on a drum, beating out a loud tune. But I couldn't bring myself to go outside and help her. I couldn't. I love her. I love her very much. Our love is so much stronger than the drink that splashes in the glass. And she loves me. I can feel it. I wouldn't use lofty, pompous words about the connection between us. I would say that I feel her love because I know it. Is it necessary to know that the sun is hotter if you can feel its warmth? Is it necessary to know that the wind is cold when you feel it piercing every cell of your body? I sit at home and feel so lousy, like I betrayed her. Her smile, her look, the scent of her body and her hair. Her love. If my doppelganger appeared from the past, at least 1 year younger than me, he'd beat me for sure. I wouldn't resist, because he'd be right. He loves her as I love her, but he doesn't yet know all the unpleasant history that has happened in the last year. When the doctor said she was terminally ill, I shouted at him hard. I told him not to joke like that, and that medical specialty would not be a defense for him. I stood in front of him, choosing the vilest words I knew, and he listened in silence. I made up some swear words as I went along, hoping to insult him as much as possible. Perhaps he knew that my cry was a cry of helplessness and despair. She was terminally ill. 3 words that came together in such a terrible phrase. Like a sharp nail, each of them crashed into my head. Their pain was not yet the real pain I experienced later, but it was enough to yell at an innocent man. I quickly ran out of steam. Do you know, doctor, how we met? I sat down on the couch and lowered my head. I knew that I would continue to talk, even if the man in a white coat answered in the negative. I only asked because it is customary to ask. It was not necessary to wait for an answer to this question, just as it is not necessary to wish health when someone sneezes. It's just a part of etiquette that doesn't have to be followed as a set of laws. But the doc didn't mind. Adjusting his glasses on his snub nose, he sat down in his chair. The weather was very bad that evening. It was so cold outside that all decent people either stayed at home or took cabs. But bad weather never stops bad people. She almost ran home as I said it was cold enough to take a leisurely stroll. She didn't want to take a cab. She told me later that she thought cab drivers were worse than robbers. But it wasn't cars with bright, yellow checkers on the roof she had to fear that night. There were two of them. Like two shadows they loomed before her, coming out of a stinking, dark alleyway. One smelled like booze, the other cackled loudly when he saw her. Maybe the guy was just being funny and liked to laugh, but he didn't seem that way to her at the time. They came almost close to her, and the one who was bigger and less cheerful mumbled something to her. She told me how she felt his huge arms around her waist. As she told me later, his touch was as disgusting as the skin of a frog she had once stroked on a dare as a child. I heard her scream. I was walking down the street, not really knowing where or why. 15 minutes ago I had been in a bar, where I filled my lungs with tobacco smoke and my stomach with strong, hot drinks. It had been a bad day. My head was full of some thoughts that buzzed like a swarm of bees. But when I heard her thin voice, the thoughts scattered. I started to look around, searching for her with my eyes, and finally saw them. The big guy was already hugging her tightly like a pile of straw and dragging her down the alley. The other was cackling merrily, making vulgar jokes. Listening, I could make out that they were definitely not going to take her to a cozy restaurant. I rushed over to them. In a matter of seconds I ran across the street and pounced on the bigger one. At that moment, I didn't think I was inferior in both height and size. With all my might, I punched him in the back of the head. My fist lit up with pain. It flashed so brightly that the next moment, I thought my hand would never be able to hold a spoon or a pen again. But there was no time to examine my hand. The big guy gasped, and his head caved in, grabbing the back of his head with his hands. I hope at that moment he thought he'd been hit with a baseball bat. I wanted to believe it. The second blow, with his still healthy hand, went to his ear. It should have made his ears pop loudly. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, I didn't know. All I knew was that I really wanted to teach these scoundrels who were so ungentlemanly in their treatment of a girl. The jolly man was already running down the alley without a backward glance when the third blow struck again at the big man's bald, round head. The bones rattled like boards cracking when they are broken. My arm slumped along his torso with a whip, but I still had my other hand. The second fist was still able to make a couple of precise lunges before the huge thing had to swallow me, tear me down, crush me into the pavement. But nothing happened. Maybe the bouncer was frightened by the fact that his friend had run away so quickly. Maybe my blows had set him off after all. But he staggered back to where the jolly man had disappeared a second ago. I stood there, breathing heavily. The pain was getting worse. My wrists gradually felt as if I was slowly sinking them into hot coals. In front of me, huddled against the cold gray wall, stood her. When I rushed to my aid, I did not know that she was so beautiful. Shivering, standing in confusion, she looked at me with sky blue eyes. As I looked at this fragile creature, who flinched at every rustle, I felt a feeling in my soul that was stronger than the pain in my hands. No, it wasn't the stupid fluttering butterflies in my stomach, but it felt so much better. Why did I tell the doctor this particular story? All my life I had thought only of myself. A damn selfish man who, at 30, doesn't even like his own reflection in the mirror and doesn't know the color of his own eyes. I always didn't care about anyone, people around me were all alien to me. But there, in the alley, I met someone who needed my protection. She needed it, and I saw gratitude in her eyes. I didn't know then that we would be together. But even then, I swore to myself that I would never hurt her, that I would always protect her. Doc, I looked up. I bet my eyes glistened with tears at that moment. I swore that I would always protect and help her, and I would keep my oath. Alas, inventors these days are not inventive enough to invent a cure for her illness. It's a strange thing. We study the cosmos, other planets, and we haven't yet figured it out for ourselves. Life is so fragile that a piece of crystal seems like a pretty solid material compared to life. Surgeries, procedures, consultations, therapies, surgeries again. At some point, my life with her turned into Groundhog Day. We would wake up and know what was waiting for us, and that knowledge made me shiver a little. It was no use. Every day I realized it more and more. Like a label, the word stuck with me. The days were going black with such rapidity that eventually there would be only darkness around me. And I was stepping into that darkness because every day she was getting worse. Hope was dissolving like an aspirin tablet in a glass of water. I was losing the strength to fight for her life. The moment I was ready to fall to my knees and call for help from someone I never believed in, I learned about the rings. The old man at the bar told me about the miracle rings that help keep loved ones and relatives safe. That's what he said: you want to keep the woman you love, you need these rings. I didn't believe all the legends. But if I was ready to believe in the existence of the Almighty, I could believe in the power of these rings. To the loud music that made even the air in the bar vibrate, he told me where to find them. I listened intently to the old man I had met 10 minutes earlier over a mug of beer. India. The land of legends and tall tales. This country is so saturated with different tales that you don't know what's true and what's not. It is impossible to believe the myths that shroud this country and impossible to believe that they are only myths. Did you know that shaking your head from side to side in India means yes? Or that the color of morning in this country is not black but white? I didn't know that until I bought a little pocket guide to India at a bookstore. With my backpack slung over my shoulders and my plane ticket in my pocket, I studied the book intently as I made my way to this country. I had never read anything so carefully in my life. I will not say that the guidebook helped me a lot. I learned from the book that Agra was in northern India and that it was accessible by train from New Delhi, where my plane had landed, to the city. Where exactly to look for the rings in this ancient, confusing city, the book did not tell me. And it couldn't have been told, since the rings are only a legend. I had to walk down more than one narrow, dirty street. I huddled in cheap motels for more than one night, listening at night to the conversations of my Agrinian neighbors. With many of them I tried to explain myself, tried to show what I was looking for. Some did not understand me, or pretended not to. Others were quicker to leave me as soon as they knew what I was looking for. I saw people's faces change when they heard about the rings. Their dark olive faces stretched in surprise, and there was such consternation in their eyes that the smiles disappeared from their toothless mouths. I found them. In one basement, where no daylight penetrated, an old man was shown to me. In the light of the oily lamps, a dried-up old man sat, covered with multicolored rags. His wrinkled face, which was covered with terrible sores, had not changed a bit when I entered. He seemed to be asleep. But it was only an impression. As soon as I said Amar Atma, he opened his eyes. His gaze, filled with a magical appeal, shackled me. I could feel myself turning into what the old man had pretended to be a few seconds ago, a statue. My muscles were subject to his gaze, my thoughts awaited his commands, my soul wanted to obey his will. Apku Amar Atma ki avashwakata. Such a strange set of incomprehensible words to me. I didn't know what he was saying, but I just nodded in response. Then I quickly came to my senses and shook my head from side to side. Thanks to the guidebook. He rose from the rug he had been sitting on. A turban dangled merrily on his head. He disappeared, ducking into one of the many low passages. In vain I tried to strain my vision to make out something inside that strange gloomy room. The old man walked away so silently that it seemed to me as if he had not touched the ground as he walked. There was a dead silence all around, though behind me through the ajar door must have been the noise and voices of the restless streets of Agra. Legends and myths roamed this city, passed down from generation to generation. Was I not part of such a legend? Have I not tried to find out what I should not have known? And don't these legends hold secrets that could kill you if you knew them? Or maybe it was simpler than that. They brought me here to rob me. The creeps ran down my back, down my arms, down my neck, and to the roots of my hair. I remembered reading in the guidebooks that India was not the most prosperous country. Tourists need to guard their wallets more carefully. I thought about how I wouldn't have to prove with my fists and screaming that I wasn't a good choice for robbery. My fists were good, of course the big guy I'd saved my wife from would prove it, but what if they had guns? The old man frightened my anxious thoughts away. He emerged from the darkness as silently as he had plunged into it. He came close to me, so that I could see every ugly mark on his face. He smiled broadly. Have you ever seen a tiger smile while looking at his dinner? I haven't. But I'm sure the old man's smile was like that grin. There was nothing cheerful or kind about his stretched lips. He smiled, and I thought about screaming. Looking intently into my eyes, I think he could see through me and feel what was going on inside me. He held out his skinny hand to me. I looked at it with difficulty, and saw a pair of rings in his outstretched palm. I knew at once that they were the rings. I don't know how, but I was sure of it, just as I was sure that the water was wet. I'd never seen rings like these with ornate, I think, magical patterns on the rims. How much? I said in plain Russian. At that moment I was poorly aware that we were from different worlds and understood each other no better than a stone understands a tree. Bilnul nahi, he hissed, still smiling fearfully. I grabbed the rings from his hand and hurried out of the gloomy cellar. As I flew back home, I kept thinking about the old man. Why had he given me the rings for nothing? I didn't know him at all. And that was the first and last time we ever saw each other. How did we understand each other? Or shouldn't we have? Maybe he wanted to get rid of the rings as soon as possible. As soon as I flew in, I went straight to the hospital. God, how she had changed. I was gone about 3 weeks, and it seemed like I was gone forever. Her face was so different, so dried up and aged, that I didn't recognize her at first. For a moment I thought it was the face of the old man who had given me the rings. But when she slowly turned her head in my direction, when she opened her eyes and looked at me, the vision was gone. I threw myself at her. Kissing her dried palms, with trembling hands I gently took her ring finger. I must help her. I promised to protect her. Pounded in my head as I clumsily tried to put the ring on her. I looked at the ring like a child who looks at a rug in a room and believes it is a magic flying carpet. After several unsuccessful attempts, the ring did slide onto her finger, and I felt a little hope in my soul. She smiled. As it later turned out for the last time. Legends can be understood in different ways and one has to know how to understand them. I got it wrong, and I paid the price for it. When I looked at her breathless body, I could not hold back my tears. I cried, not only because I had lost her forever, but because I had believed in the magical power of the rings. Instead of spending my last days with her, I ran through the streets of a strange city, looking for hope that didn't exist. I was not the first, nor would I be the last. All people believe in magic, because when the very hard days come, everyone wants a little bit of that same magic to help them. It didn't help me. Actually, it didn't help me the way I wanted it to. When I looked out the window and saw her under the tree, the ground was gone from under my feet. She was standing there in exactly the same dress she had been buried in. Her face was younger again, but there wasn't a drop of that girl I loved and loved so much. She had left this world, that I realized as I looked at her. Under the tree stood only her shell, soulless and lifeless. Her eyes, her nose, her mouth had none of her vital beauty. Now do you understand why I didn't run to her? And I'm sitting in my chair, almost finishing my whiskey, and I see that she's gone by our tree. Now I hear someone very quietly scratching at the front door. There have never been mice in the house, but I can clearly hear someone rustling on the porch. And then I hear someone's quiet scream or croak or whisper. Maybe it's a monster calling to me. It's hard to make out. There is a knife next to me. I don't know if it will help me or not. But I can't find any other protection in the house. She'll get me, I know it. She's coming for the same ring I have on my finger. I looked at my ring when she was gone. I tried to take it off. But it wouldn't come off. All my attempts were in vain. It clung to me tightly, like a leech. I hear a thud on the door. Then another. There was a cracking sound. Our front door wasn't the most secure, we were never afraid of burglars, and we didn't think anyone would break into our house. She could handle the door, that much I knew too. I glanced at the ring again. Yes, she'll get to me for sure. I don't know what she will do to me. But what I do know is that when they put me in my own grave, I won't stay there long.